The carriage should never have taken the southern road. Queen Isolde of Vantara knew this the moment the wheels rolled off the king's way and onto the rutted track that wound through the borderlands like a scar. But the message she carried could not wait for ceremony. It could not wait for a royal escort in polished silver or for banners announcing her approach to every spy from here to the mountain passes. What she carried was a single folded parchment, pressed against the skin above her heart, and the name of a traitor inked in her own hand. She traveled as a merchant's widow. Plain brown wool, a hood drawn low, 2 guards in common leather, sworn to silence upon pain of their own lives. Her golden hair, the hair the court poets had written sonnets about, was braided tight and hidden beneath a kerchief the color of river mud. No rings, no crown, not even the signet she usually wore on a chain beneath her bodice. The border was 2 nights away. The man she was going to meet was the only one in the kingdom who could confirm what she already suspected, that her own cousin, the Duke of Murren, was preparing to sell her throne to the Ostmark Empire for a price that had not yet been named. She did not see the ambush coming. No one did. The first arrow killed the lead guard before he could draw his sword. The second took the driver off the box. The horses screamed and reared, and the carriage listed hard to the right, and Isolde was thrown against the door with such force that she tasted blood on her tongue. She heard the second guard cry out. She heard him stop crying out. Then came boots. Many boots. Rough voices barking orders in the clipped dialect of the frontier garrisons. She reached for the small dagger strapped to her thigh, but the door was wrenched open and a hand clamped around her wrist before her fingers could close on the hilt. She was pulled into the cold air and shoved to her knees in the road, and when she raised her head, she was looking up at a man she had never seen before. He was tall, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who had spent their lives in armor and saddle. His hair was black, cut short against a scalp that bore the thin white line of an old sword cut. His eyes, when they found hers, were the color of slate after a storm. And there was something in them, some coiled watchfulness, that told her he had already decided what she was before she had opened her mouth. Ostmark silver in the carriage, one of the soldiers called from behind her, folded in the lining of a cloak. She felt the blood leave her face. That silver was meant for her informant. It was her own coin, drawn from her own treasury, and it bore no royal mark precisely because it could not. But to the eyes of a frontier commander hunting for enemies of the crown, it was a death sentence folded into cloth. And this, another voice said, and she heard the crackle of parchment. The man in front of her, the commander, extended his gauntlet hand. The letter was placed into it. He did not take his eyes from her face as he broke the seal and read. She watched his jaw tighten. She watched the slate of his eyes go to flint. A name, he said softly. Just a name, written in a woman's hand, on paper that carries no signature and no seal. And you, alone on the border road, in a carriage full of foreign coin. He crouched down in front of her. He was close enough that she could smell the leather of his harness and the faint smoke of a campfire in his clothes. She did not look away. She had been raised from the cradle not to look away. "Who sent you?" he asked. She said nothing, because the truth would not be believed. Because the truth, spoken by a mud-stained woman in a kerchief on a lonely road, would be the fastest way to end her own life. If this man thought her a spy, she was a prisoner. If he thought her the queen, and he was the duke's creature, she was a corpse. She did not yet know which he was. She could not afford to know wrongly. So she gave him the one answer a trained agent of a foreign power would give. She gave him silence. He watched her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not cruelty, she realized with a strange cold lurch. Something worse. Interest. "Bind her," he said, rising. "We march at first light." And just like that, the most powerful woman in the realm ceased to exist. They took her cloak. They took her boots and replaced them with rough clogs that bit at her heels. They took the kerchief, and when her bright hair spilled loose, The commander paused for only a heartbeat before he looked away and ordered it cut. A soldier hacked at it with a hunting knife until it fell in uneven waves around her jaw. The golden strands drifted into the dust of the road, and she watched them go without a sound, because a queen does not weep where a jailer can see. They put her in the prisoner cart at dawn. Iron at her wrists. Iron at her ankles. A length of chain running between her collar and the post, so that if the cart struck a rut, the metal bit into her throat. The man who locked it into place had been a baker's son. She remembered because she had pardoned his sentence 2 winters past on a plea from his mother. He did not recognize her. Of course he did not. He saw only what his commander had told him to see. The cart lurched forward, and the borderlands rolled past, and with every turn of the wheel, the distance between Queen Isolde of Vantara and her own throne grew longer, and no one in the kingdom knew. No one, she thought, except the Duke of Murren. And he would be smiling. The salt mines of Kessurn lay 3 days' ride to the south, in a valley that had been stripped of trees a century ago and never allowed to regrow. From the road above, the pits looked like wounds in the earth. Black shafts. White stone. Smoke rising from the cook fires of the guard barracks. The smell reached her before the gates did. Not pleasant salt, not the clean bite of the sea, but a bitter chemical sharpness that coated the tongue and never left. She was unloaded in the yard with 9 other prisoners. 2 were thieves. 3 were deserters. 4 were men whose crimes were not announced and whose eyes had the hollow look of those who had been questioned too many times about things they could not answer. The commander, she had learned, was called Darian Voss. He was a younger son of a minor house who had earned his command the hard way in border skirmishes against Ostmark raiders, and he had a reputation for extracting confessions from prisoners other interrogators had broken their hands trying to crack. She knew this because the guards spoke of him with the mixture of pride and caution that soldiers reserve for officers they both admire and fear. She listened without seeming to listen. She had learned this art as a girl, standing in her father's council chamber, pretending to watch the tapestries while men spoke around her as if she were not there. In the yard, a quartermaster with a leather apron moved from prisoner to prisoner, recording names and assigning numbers. When he reached her, he waited. "Name," he said. She said nothing. He wrote something on his slate. 79, he said. "You'll answer to that now. Your old name is gone." He looked up at her, and for just a moment, his eyes were not unkind. "It's easier if you stop fighting it, woman. The ones who hold on to who they were are the ones who break first." Oh, she thought. If you only knew. They stripped her in the washing shed. Not cruelly. Efficiently, the way men strip a deer. She stood without flinching while a matron with hands like wet rope scrubbed her skin raw with a gray cake of lye soap, and then they dressed her in the same coarse tunic and trousers the men wore, tied at the waist with a length of rope. They gave her a pick. They gave her a tin cup. They gave her a cot in a long stone barack where 40 other women already slept, and they gave her the understanding, without words, that if she lay down on that cot and did not rise with the dawn bell, someone would come to drag her to the pits, and they would not care whether her feet touched the ground as they went. She did not sleep the first night. She lay on her back and she listened to the breathing of the women around her, and she tried to remember the weight of the crown on her head. She could not. She could remember only the weight of the collar on her throat. On the second morning, she was sent into the lower shafts. The salt mines were not hot, as she had expected. They were cold. A damp, penetrating cold that settled in the bones and never let go. The walls glittered with veins of crystal that caught the lamplight and threw it back in strange pale colors, and for the first hour, before the work began, she thought it might be the most beautiful place she had ever seen. Then they handed her a pick. She had never held a tool of that weight in her life. Her hands, which had been trained to the harp and the pen and the careful handling of state documents, had no understanding of how to swing iron against stone. Her first blow glanced off the wall and nearly took her own knee. The woman working beside her, a weathered creature of perhaps 40 with hair the color of ash, caught the handle before it swung again. "Not like that," the woman said, without looking up. "You'll break your wrist. Watch me." Short strokes. From the shoulder, not the arm. Let the weight of the tool do the work. Isolde watched. She mimicked. She struck again, and this time the pick bit the wall and a small chip of salt fell free, and the woman grunted what might have been approval. "New ones always try too hard the first day," the woman said. "Then they cry the second. Then they work or they die. What's your name, girl?" 79, Isolde said. It was the first word she had spoken since the road. "That's your number, not your name." Isolde looked at her. And because it was safer than the truth, and because she had always loved the name, she said, "Mira." "Mira," the woman repeated. "Ran. Pleased, I'm sure. Keep your head down and your mouth shut, and don't share your water with men. That's everything I know." She smiled a little at this. Just the corner of her mouth. It was the first smile she had offered anything in 3 days, and Rin saw it and did not comment, and something between them was established without a word being wasted. By the end of that first day in the pits, Queen Isolde's hands were a single blistered wound. By the end of the second, the blisters had burst, and she worked with her palms wrapped in strips torn from the hem of her tunic. By the end of the third, she had learned the rhythm of the pick, and she had learned how to swallow the dust without coughing, and she had learned that the hardest thing in the mines was not the labor. It was Darian Voss. He came down into the pits every evening. Not to inspect the work. The foreman handled that. He came for her. He would stop at the mouth of her shaft, and he would lean against the salt wall with the easy carelessness of a man who had never been afraid of a single thing in his life, and he would watch her work. He did not speak. Not at first. He simply watched, with those slate-gray eyes, for as long as it pleased him, and then he would push himself off the wall and walk back up into the light without a word. She felt his gaze the way a body feels a fever coming on. She did not look at him. She never looked at him. She swung the pick, and the salt fell, and she did not give him so much as the turn of her head, because she knew, without being told, that the first time she acknowledged his presence was the first time he would believe he had found a way inside her. On the 5th evening, he spoke. "You have beautiful hands for a spy," he said. Her pick struck the wall. A piece of salt the size of a fist broke loose. "They are ruined now, of course." "That is a pity." She did not turn. She struck again. "In 3 weeks," he said, "when you can no longer close them without pain, you will tell me who sent you. You will tell me what the name on the letter was meant to mean. And you will tell me how many others are waiting in the hills for the signal that was never sent. I am a patient man, woman. I have broken older and harder and prouder than you, and none of them lasted a season in the pits. You will not be the first." She set the pick down. Slowly. Deliberately. She took a breath and she turned, and for the first time since the road, she looked at Darian Voss. She did not speak. She did not need to. She let him see what was in her face, and she let him understand, as fully as a man like him could understand, that she was not afraid of him. That she had never been afraid of him. That the fear he was accustomed to, the fear that had broken all those older and harder and prouder, was not present in her and was not coming. And then she picked up her pick, and she turned back to the wall, and she resumed her work as if he were not there. She heard him breathe out. A slow, careful exhale, the kind a man makes when he has just realized that a game he thought he was winning may be a different game entirely. He stood in the mouth of the shaft for a long while after that. She felt his gaze on the back of her neck for every swing of the pick. He did not come the next night. He did not come the one after. On the 8th day, he came again, and this time he brought a guard with a flask of wine and a folding chair, and he sat down at the mouth of the shaft, and he watched her for 3 hours without speaking, as if he were trying to read a book in a language he had once known and had somehow forgotten. The trouble began on the 14th day in the lower shaft when the beam gave way. A section of the ceiling, undermined by a vein of poor-quality salt, sagged without warning, and a man named Hollis, who had a wife and 2 children waiting for him at the end of a 7-year sentence, was pinned beneath a fallen timber with his leg bent the wrong way. The other prisoners froze. The foreman shouted for the medical shed. Everyone knew what that meant. A man who could not walk out of the pits did not walk anywhere. The camp did not waste bread on the lame. Isolde moved before she had decided to move. She crossed to the fallen timber and knelt in the salt dust. She put her hands on Hollis's face and made him look at her. She had seen a physician work on a shattered leg once, in her own war camp, 3 summers ago, and she remembered what the man had said about splinting and shock and the way a body will tell itself it cannot survive unless another voice tells it otherwise. "Look at me," she said. Her voice was very calm. "You are not going to die in this shaft. You are going to walk out of it. Do you understand?" Hollis, white with pain, nodded. She turned to Wren, who had come up beside her. "2 planks of the timber. Flat ones. And your rope belt and mine. We're going to straighten the leg, and it is going to hurt him beyond anything he has ever known, and then we are going to bind it, and 4 of you are going to carry him out. Quickly. Now." It was the voice that did it, not the words. The voice that had been bred in her from childhood, the voice of a woman who had never in her life given an order and expected it to go unheeded. Wren moved. The others moved. The foreman, who had opened his mouth to overrule her, closed it again without speaking. Hollis screamed once when they pulled his legs straight, and then he passed out, which was a mercy. They splinted him with the planks and the rope belts. They carried him up the shaft in relay, 4 men at a time, and Isolde walked beside him all the way to the surface with her hand on his shoulder, because she had told him he would walk out, and she meant for him to believe it when he woke. At the mouth of the pit, she looked up into the failing light, and Darian Voss was standing there. He had seen the last of it. The binding, the relay, the walk. He was standing very still, with his arms folded across his chest, and the slate of his eyes was very dark, and he did not look angry. He looked, for the first time since she had known him, uncertain. She walked past him without turning her head. That night, in the barack, Wren sat down on the edge of her cot. The older woman said nothing for a long while. Then, quietly, in a voice no one else could hear, she said, "Mira, where did you learn to speak to a man like that?" Isolde closed her eyes. "A long time ago," she said. "In a place far from here." Wren did not ask again. But Isolde saw, in the way the other women began to look at her in the days that followed, that Wren had told. Not the truth, because Wren did not know the truth. But some version of it. Some story of a woman who was not what the number on her tunic said she was. And the women of the barack, who had nothing and owed nothing, began, without speaking of it, to save her the dry corner of the bread, to leave the warmer end of the bench for her at the evening meal, to ask her, quietly, when a dispute arose, what she thought should be done. A small court, Isolde thought, one evening, watching 2 of the women defer a quarrel to her judgment. A court of rags and salt dust and stolen bread. And she was still a queen in it. Darian Voss noticed. Of course he noticed. He had built his career on noticing things. He noticed the way the guards stopped their banter when she passed. He noticed the way the old foreman, Brenner, a man who had been breaking prisoners for 20 years, had begun to address her without the casual contempt he used for the others. He noticed that the barack, which should have been a nest of petty rivalries and informer networks, had become, around her, a strange quiet island of something he could only call order. He noticed, most of all, that he had begun to wait for the evening, that he found reasons to walk the lower shaft, that he had stopped bringing the chair and the wine because he was no longer pretending to watch her for information. He was watching her because he had never in his life seen anything like her, and he did not yet have a word for what she was. She never spoke to him. Not a word. Not since that single look on the 5th evening. And yet he knew, with a certainty that disturbed him at night when he tried to sleep, that she was aware of him in every moment he was present. that she was choosing deliberately to withhold herself. And the longer she withheld, the more he understood that she was not withholding from weakness. She was withholding from strength. On the 21st day, he ordered her brought to his office. It was a small stone room at the top of the guard tower, with a narrow window that looked out over the pits. A fire in the grate. A desk. A single wooden chair into which she was made to sit, with her wrists still in their chains. He poured wine. 2 cups. He pushed one across the desk toward her. She did not touch it. "I have been reading the dispatches from the capital," he said. She said nothing. "There is a rumor," he said, "that the Queen is on progress in the north. That she has been seen at 3 abbeys and a great festival in heaven. That she has dined with the Archbishop and blessed a new ship in the harbor of Thane." She said nothing. "It is a very thorough rumor," he said. "Almost suspiciously so. The sort of rumor one puts in place when one does not wish a certain truth to be widely understood." He watched her. The fire cracked. Outside, very faintly, a bell rang the hour. "Tell me who you are," he said. His voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of an interrogator. It was the voice of a man asking a question to which he was very afraid of the answer. "Tell me, please." She looked at him. And in that look, for just a moment, she allowed him to see something she had not allowed anyone to see since the road. Not the Queen. Not yet. But the woman behind the Queen. The woman who was tired and cold and very far from home, and who had, against every intention she had ever held, begun to see him. Not as her captor. Not even as her enemy. As a man who was about to learn something that would end his life as he had known it. "I cannot tell you who I am," she said. Her voice was rough from disuse, but it had not lost its music. "I can only tell you this. When you find out, you will not forgive yourself. And you will want me to forgive you. And I will have to decide on that day whether I am able. Do not ask me to decide now. I am not ready." She stood. The chains rattled. "Take me back to the barack," she said. He stared at her. He did not move. He did not call for the guard. He sat at his desk, and the wine in his cup trembled very slightly, and then he rose, and he crossed the room, and he unlocked the chain at her wrists with his own hands. He did not remove the iron bands. He could not. He could only open the chain between them so that she could move her hands independently, as a free woman would. "Go," he said. His voice was very low. "Back to the barack. Tonight. In the morning, you will be assigned to the upper shaft, which is lighter work. And you will take your evening meal in the kitchen, where it is warm. I cannot do more than that. Not yet. But I will do that." She paused at the door. She did not turn her head. "Commander Voss," she said. "You did not know. I will remember that you did not know. Whatever else comes." Then she walked out, and the door closed behind her, and Darian Voss sat down in his chair, and he put his face in his hands, and for the first time since he had been a boy of 12 watching his mother lowered into the earth, he wept. The royal guard came on the 34th day. They came at noon. 50 riders in the silver and blue of the House of Vantara, led by Captain Aldrin of the Queen's Own, who had been tearing the kingdom apart for over a month looking for his missing sovereign. Following a trail of rumor and ruined courier posts and a single blood-stained glove that had been found in a ditch 3 leagues from the southern road. They rode into the yard of the salt mines of Kessurn with their swords drawn and their banners high, and the bell in the tower began to ring the alarm, and the foreman came running, and the guards formed up in their lines. And Darian Voss walked down the tower stairs to meet them with the slow, steady tread of a man walking to his own execution. Because he knew. He had known since the night in his office. He had perhaps known from the 5th evening in the shaft. He had certainly known from the morning he unlocked her chains, and he had spent every day since then preparing himself for the sound of those hooves in the yard. Captain Aldrin drew rein in front of him. The captain was an old man with a white beard and eyes like chips of winter sky, and he did not dismount. "Commander Voss," Aldrin said. "We are looking for a woman. Brought here 31 days ago by your patrol. traveling under common guise, carrying a sealed letter and a sum of Ostmark coin. We have reason to believe she is being held in your pits." Darian Voss bowed his head. He did not attempt to lie. He did not attempt to explain. He said, "She is in the upper shaft at the third bell of the morning watch. I will take you to her myself." Aldrin's eyes narrowed. "You know who she is." "I do now." "When did you learn?" "Too late, Captain." "And not too late." "Both at once." The old soldier studied him for a long moment from the back of his horse. Then he swung down from the saddle, and he handed his reins to a subordinate, and he said, "Take me to the Queen." The walk from the yard to the upper shaft was the longest walk of Darian Voss's life. The guards fell in behind. The foremen came out of their huts to stare. Word ran ahead of them the way fire runs through dry grass, and by the time they reached the mouth of the upper shaft, every prisoner in the camp had been herded out into the open to witness what no one yet understood they were about to witness. She was working when he came for her. Her hair was salt-dusted. Her hands were bound in strips of cloth. Her tunic was stained and her face was pale from weeks of poor food, and she was, by any measure the human eye could apply, a prisoner in a pit. She looked up. She saw Captain Aldrin, and she saw the silver and blue banners, and she saw Darian Voss standing 2 paces behind the captain with his head bowed and his hand on the hilt of his sword in the old gesture of surrender, and for the first time in 34 days, Queen Isolde of Vantara allowed herself to be who she was. She did not weep. A queen does not weep where her subjects can see. But she set down her pick, and she stepped away from the salt wall, and she walked toward them with the particular straight-backed grace that had been drilled into her as a girl of 6 by a dowager aunt who had said, over and over, "A queen walks into a room as if the floor itself is honored to receive her." Captain Aldrin went to one knee. 50 men of the royal guard went to one knee behind him. The foreman, slowly catching on, sank to one knee. The guards of the salt mines, who had laughed at her as they cut her hair on the road, went to one knee in the salt dust of their own yard. The prisoners did not know what to do. They stood frozen, their eyes very wide. She stopped in front of Captain Aldrin. She put her ruined, cloth-wrapped hand on his white head. "Rise, old friend," she said. "I am glad you came." "Your Majesty," he said, and his voice cracked on the word. "Forgive us." "Forgive me. We searched the 4 roads and the 6 rivers. We did not know to look in the pits." "No one knew to look in the pits," she said. She turned her head. Her eyes found Darian Voss. He had not risen. He was on one knee in the salt dust, and his head was bowed, and his sword was drawn and laid flat across his palms, and he was holding it out to her the way a man holds out his own life. The yard was very quiet. She walked to him. The chain at her ankles still rattled. No one had yet thought to strike it off. She stopped in front of him. She looked down at the sword, and at the bowed black head, and at the scar that ran faintly through his hair where a sword cut had very nearly killed him in some forgotten border skirmish. She thought, with a clarity that surprised her, that she had come to know that scar. That she had looked at it, in the evenings, from the mouth of her shaft, and wondered what battle had put it there, and whether the man who had made it had lived. "Commander Voss," she said. He did not raise his head. "Your Majesty." "Look at me." He raised his head. The slate of his eyes was wet. He did not try to hide it. "You believed," she said, slowly, "that I was an enemy of the realm." "I did. You believed that the coin and the letter and my silence were the marks of a spy." "I did. You were wrong." "I was wrong." "And if I had been what you believed me to be," she said, "you would have done your duty. You would have defended the crown. You would have defended me, though you did not know you were defending me." He drew a breath. It was a ragged breath. "Yes," he said. She stood over him for a long moment. The yard held its silence. Captain Aldrin, old soldier that he was, did not move a muscle, because he had lived long enough to know when a queen was making a decision, and when a man's life was being weighed in the balance. She bent, and she took the sword from his hands. "Rise," she said. He rose. He was taller than her by a head. He did not look away from her face. "You will not die today, Darian Voss," she said, quietly, so that only he could hear. "Not by my hand and not by another's. What you have done, you will answer for. But not with your life. Your life is required. There is a traitor in my kingdom, and the man who helped the Ostmark plant their silver in my carriage is still walking free, and I will need a commander who knows how to hunt a spy. I believe I know where to find one." The breath went out of him. "Your Majesty," he said. "Not yet," she said. "Not for a little while. First, you will walk with me out of this pit. You will carry my sword at your own hip, because my hands are not yet fit to hold it. And when we reach the capital, you will stand before my council, and you will tell them, in your own words, what happened on that road, and in that shaft, and in the tower office on the night you asked me who I was. You will leave nothing out. You will not spare yourself. And then the council will do what councils do, and I will do what I must, and you will accept whatever comes." "Yes, Your Majesty." "But Darian," she said, and her voice was very soft now, and for the first time since the road, she used his name. "When it is done. When the traitor is hanged and the duke is in the ground and the kingdom is quiet again. I will remember that you wept in your office when you began to suspect. I will remember that you unchained my wrists with your own hands. I will remember that you came into this yard on your knee before you were commanded, because your honor required it of you, and no man made you do it but yourself. I will remember all of it. Do you understand me?" "Your Majesty," he said. He could not say more. "Good," she said. She turned. She walked back across the yard. The chain at her ankles rattled. Captain Aldrin sent a man running for a smith. And Queen Isolde of Vantara, in a prisoner's tunic with her hair cut to her jaw and her hands wrapped in strips of her own hem, walked through the kneeling rows of her subjects like a woman returning from a long journey in a country no cartographer had ever mapped. She paused beside Rin. The older woman was on her knees in the dust, her ash-colored hair loose around her face, her eyes wide with something that was not quite fear and not quite wonder. Isolde crouched down. She put her cloth-wrapped hand under Ren's chin and lifted her face. "You will come with me," she said. "You and Hollis and every woman in that barack who wants to. I owe you a debt that cannot be paid in this place." "Mira," Ren whispered. "That was a good name," Isolde said. "I will keep it, I think, for the nights when I need to remember." And she smiled, that small corner of the mouth smile, and Ren laughed through her tears, and the laughter ran along the yard like the first crack in a long winter's ice. They rode out of Kessurn at dawn. The queen rode at the head of the column on a gray mare, in a cloak of her own blue and silver, with Captain Aldrin at her right hand and Darian Voss at her left. Behind them, in wagons, rode Ren and Hollis and every prisoner whose sentence she had reviewed in the long hours of the night and found unjust or excessive, or owed to the corruption of a local lord she now intended to have dealt with. The salt mines of Kessurn would continue to operate, because salt was the lifeblood of the northern trade. But they would operate under new supervision and with a new charter, and no prisoner sent there again would ever be stripped of their name without a hearing. The kingdom learned the story slowly. The court learned it first, and the court reeled. The Duke of Murren was arrested at his own dinner table within the week, and what was found in his correspondence was worse than what Isolde had feared, and the trial that followed was quick, and the sentence was just, and the throne of Vantara held. Darian Voss stood before the council as he had been ordered, and he told the story as he had been ordered, and he left nothing out, and he spared himself nothing, and when he was finished, the council voted on his fate, and the queen cast the deciding vote. And the vote was mercy. He served her afterward. For a very long time. He hunted the remaining threads of the Duke's conspiracy through every borderland and every port, and he did so with the particular relentlessness of a man who has a debt he can never fully repay and who intends to spend his life trying. The scar on his scalp was joined, in the years that followed, by others. He was said, by the soldiers who served under him, to be the hardest commander in the kingdom, and the fairest, and the only man in the realm who could walk into the queen's private council without being announced. There were stories, of course. There were always stories, in a court like hers. There were whispers about the evenings when he would ride alone to the palace and stay late, and not be seen to leave. There were whispers about the way she looked at him when she thought no one was watching, and the way he looked at her when he knew everyone was. But whispers, in a court like hers, were a kind of weather. They came and they went. They did not touch the two of them. They had started in a salt mine, after all. They had started with iron on her wrists and mud in her hair, and a sword laid flat across his palms in a kneeling yard. What they became, afterward, was their own to know, and not the kingdom's to name. And in the long winter evenings, when the fire was low in the queen's private chamber and the guards were dismissed, and Darian Voss sat across from her with a cup of wine in his hand and a silence between them that had become, over the years, the most comfortable silence either of them had ever known, she would sometimes look at her hands in the firelight. They had healed. Mostly. But there were lines across the palms, fine pale lines where the blisters had burst and burst again, that no amount of time would ever fully erase. She could close her hands now without pain. But she remembered what it had felt like not to be able to. And she remembered who she had been in the pits when she had been Mira, and when a woman named Ren had taught her how to swing a pick from the shoulder and not from the arm. She did not tell him, often, what she remembered. She did not need to. He had been there. He had seen. Sometimes, on those long evenings, she would simply reach across the small table between them and lay her hand on his. And he would turn his palm up to meet hers, and their fingers would fit together the way they had fit, unspoken, since the first time he had unlocked her chains with his own hands. And they would sit like that in the firelight for a long time. And that, perhaps, was the end of the story. Or the beginning of the one after it. If you have come this far with her, with the queen in her prisoner's tunic and her commander on his knee and the long salt dust of that yard at dawn, then you have walked a road very few people walk anymore. Most stories today ask only for a minute of your time. This one asked for most of an hour, and you gave it, and that means something. If something in her silence in that shaft reminded you of a silence you have held. If something in his slow, unwilling recognition of who she was reminded you of a truth you once had to face about someone you had misjudged. If the moment he knelt in the yard made the room feel a little quieter around you, then take 1 second, right now, and press the like button. It is a small thing. It tells the silent machinery of this place that this kind of story is a story worth telling, and it is the only way tales like this one reach the next person who needs to hear them. And if you have a moment more, tell me in the comments, was there a moment you knew she would survive it? Was there a moment you knew he would break? I read every one, and the best of them find their way into the next story I write. And if there is a friend of yours, or a sister, or a quiet one in your life who has been through a winter of their own and come out the other side with their dignity intact, share this with them. Some stories are meant to be passed hand to hand, like a lantern down a dark hall. For now, the fire is low, and the queen has closed her hand over his, and the night is long, and the kingdom is quiet. Sleep well. I will see you in the next one.